From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt. Our colleague Noel is not here right now, but will be returning shortly.
They call me Ben. We're joined, as always, with our super producer, Alexis, codename Doc Holliday Jackson. Most importantly, you are here, and that makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Record scratch real quick. Thank you. This is part 2 of a 2-part series that may end up being an ongoing series. You'll see what we mean in a second. But fellow conspiracy realists, please check out part 1 first. If you are hearing anything that sounds like we're skipping over background or something of that nature, then there's a very good chance that Matt and I are exploring it in part 1 of this series on LaMDA and conscious AI. Matt, you and I are coming in kind of hot from our episode that we knocked out earlier today, and I've got to say, in the interim, did you and I had a brief but pretty interesting discussion about Blake Lemoine, and do you still kind of what's your take on our first episode?
Oh, wow. Well, first part is we have to remember LaMDA stands for Language Model for Dialogue Applications. And we have to remember that this thing we're discussing throughout this episode and the previous episode is, how did you describe it, Ben? An amalgamation or a producer of language programs, kind of, or language models?
Yeah, it's a creator of chatbots. It's not itself a chatbot. Here are the facts. So LaMDA is an incredibly sophisticated next step in the evolution, might be a dangerous word for some, in this specific field, in the quest for several holy grails of machine learning, right? Deep learning, how things are processed. And I think you and I took pains to note that for a chatbot, for something that is built to appear human in conversation, its ability to converse depends entirely on the material it is fed. So it's almost, I was trying to think of an analogy that would fit, and there aren't a ton of really good analogies for this, but one might be, how the nature of what honeybees or what cows consume can change the taste of their honey or their milk. I think it's a crude comparison, but it's not too far off. And that's what we're sort of dealing with here. And before we dive in, like in our previous episode, we talked about the background of LaMDA, the background of chatbots, neural network technology. We talked about the realizations, the revelations, the epiphanies of one Mr. Blake Lemoine, who remains a Google employee on administrative leave as we record today. And we said in the next episode, part 2 here, we're going to talk about the responses from the scientific community at large. We're also going to talk about what some of his critics have to say. And we'll talk a little bit about the nature of what it means, if it does indeed mean anything, to be sentient, to feel. And Matt, codename Doc, before we do this, I feel like we have to say shout out to Blake, because you and I were talking about this in every interview I've seen with him and a lot of writing that I've read of his. He does not come across in any way as a bad faith actor. He's not after money. He's not someone who's doing that thing, where this is common with a lot of flim-flam artists, where he says, I can't tell you everything. unless you buy my books and attend my conferences. He's got a blog that he's been updating on a regular basis now. There's thoughts in countless interviews. Like he'll correct stuff that he feels was mischaracterized, but he's never once sounded really, really angry at someone for disagreeing with him. And I respect that.
Totally. Fully respect that. I want to read the bio that Blake has on, it's very short, on his blog. Blake states, I'm a software engineer, I'm a priest, I'm a father, I'm a veteran. I'm an ex-convict, I'm an AI researcher, I'm a Cajun, I'm whatever I need to be next. It's interesting. Lots of stuff about him there, and also very adaptable. I like it.
Yes. Yeah. And his incarceration, I believe, refers to something he brings up later in conversations about the concept of owning a living, thinking mind, because he had to go a legal route to resign from the military here in the United States. That did result in his incarceration. He also has, he has numerous bona fides, which we'll get to in a moment. We do want to note that for a lot of his critics, his background is an integral part of their criticism. Does that make it correct? Not necessarily, but it does mean that we have to talk about that as well. So again, we are being very clear that we don't think Blake is in this for the money or some imagined payoff. We don't think he's in it for attention or self-aggrandizement or anything like that. But not everyone agrees, and certainly not everyone agrees that LaMDA is, in fact, alive. As you'll find, most people in the field do not. Here's where it gets crazy. So we looked into his claims, part one. Let's look at the discourse and criticism surrounding them. There's a lot, man. There is a lot. And some of it runs from more pop science stuff with, snarky titles that are a little bit clickbaity. Some of it comes very reasoned from experts in the rarefied air of these scientific fields. And then some of it comes from those same experts, but it sounds impassioned, aggravated, almost offended by these claims, which was very interesting to me. You know what I mean? I guess maybe it's because so many people in these fields have had to deal with the idea of artificial intelligence or machine consciousness or whatever you want to call it being misreported so often.
Oh, yeah.
So very, very often.
Fully misreported, misunderstood by, a reporter. I would, say even like myself in the misunderstandings that I have with this subject, as well as the pop culture that's built around it and the way I form my opinions on fictional stories. I mean, really, honestly, I do. I have deep internal fears about uprisings, about true artificial intelligence and what's going to happen when we really create one. And it's mostly because of the things I've watched or games I've played and kind of a little bit of my understanding of just how humans are and how we treat the things we, quote, own, unquote. It really does. I don't know. I can just imagine that if you're an expert in one of these fields or this field in particular, or even just something's really close, you're so used to having to bat down all kinds of silliness, maybe stupidity, again, on my part. And they feel like it's almost a chip. I imagine a chip being on the shoulder, like feeling like you have to do that. So this is part of the job. I got to chop down things that are just dumb.
Yeah.
But again, we're not saying that what Blake is saying is dumb. It's just, I don't know. I think you'll understand this instinctual reaction that we might be seeing here.
Yeah, people like Emily Bender may be tempted to agree with you, Matt. Bender is a professor of computational linguistics at the University of Washington, and referred to this entire story when it broke as a sideshow. Bender additionally noted a potential danger about this conversation, saying, quote, "The problem is the more this technology gets sold as artificial intelligence, let alone something sentient, the more people are willing to go along with AI systems," end quote, "that cause real world harm." So the idea is that the more it gets into the public sphere that there are living, thinking, digital persons, then the more people are likely to agree with maybe the narrow AI stuff that we talked about in part one, things that do have many of the inherent biases of their creators, things that are provably bad at at various degrees of differentiation and discretion. This is something that people rightly seem worried about, terrified in some ways. And then there are other people who say the technology just isn't there.
People like Max Kreminski, who is a computational media researcher at the University of California, Santa Cruz, the Fightin' Cruz. Max argues, again, exactly what you're saying, Ben, just that LaMDA itself, this thing that we are calling LaMDA, quote, simply doesn't support some key capabilities of human-like consciousness.
Yeah, just the architecture is not there. And this is another part of this conversation that is this healthy conversation that I think might surprise a lot of people. Just like so many other scientists and experts, Blake Lemoine found himself, not through acts of malevolence, mischaracterized in popular science reporting. He has a conversation about this in a blog entry called Scientific Data and Religious Opinions. We're going somewhere with this. He says, LaMDA is a novel type of artificial intelligence. Again, this is all his view. And he says, people have been talking about it in the press, on social media, as though it is what is called a large language model, or LLM. And that's what we're talking about, feeding a bunch of stuff into a thing to get it to mimic or replicate behavior. And he says LLM is one of its components, but the full system is much more complex and contains many components which are not found in other similar systems. He talks about how like we were saying earlier, there's no established way to test a system like LaMDA for stuff, for different types of biases, because it's new. And then he also says LaMDA told him several things in connection to identity that seemed very unlike things I had ever seen in any natural language generation system before. And he talks about how LLMs work by leveraging statistical regularities in their training data. And he says that LaMDA wasn't just simply reproducing stereotypes. It produced reasoning about why it held those beliefs. And he says it would sometimes say things similar to, quote, "I know I'm not very well educated on this topic, but I'm trying to learn. Could you explain to me what's going wrong with thinking that so I can get better?" Which is funny, Matt, because you used a phrase that stood out to me in part one where you said, "doing the work, Google." So
yep.
It looks like your kid is too. So that's part of it is, in some cases, experts may be, from Lemoine's perspective, objecting to things that he himself did not say. But that's not all. That's just one side part. That's like the French fries and the combo meal of criticism here, because a lot of the criticism hinges on the idea of mimicry versus sentience. And that's a little bit more of a pickle than I think some of us might believe or assume.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the put in, you get out what you put in, right? The same concept. As we mentioned, LaMDA has been trained on just a ton of language, millions, trillions, perhaps, of words. Is it trillions? I think it's probably trillions of words, different languages, just so much information that has been fed, all for the purposes of trying to make it seem as though it is human or can give you a natural language response, right? That's natural. The key word there is natural. as though a human were saying it. So you feel like when you interact with it, it is a human. Like, that's kind of the point, right? So this concept, this knowledge, right, that's what it's meant to do. That's what it's been fed. But a lot of these people who are, disagreeing with Lemoine to say that, no, you're not seeing sentience. You are seeing high level mimicry, like very, very good character actor stuff.
Yeah, like Michelin star level mimicry, right? Mm-hmm. So from this perspective, LaMDA is doing what it was designed to do, like any other successful machine or program. I like to think of it this way. The objection through analogy is something similar to this. If you hop in a car, or you're in a car now, and you push the gas and the car goes, does it mean that the car somehow wants to go? Does it mean it has feelings about going? Does the action and reaction indicate to you that your car desires to move forward? Does it on some level ask why it is going? Or is it just doing what it was built to do?
Yeah, but is your car telling you my emotions?
Yeah, is your Camry going, Matt, I just need a 5. It's been a tough day. A bird pooped on me. I'm not feeling great about how I look right now.
I noticed you didn't stay in the eco zone as much as you usually do today. Mm-hmm. Man, mm-hmm. Gas mileage was all the way down to 39.7.
And you're like, do you name your vehicle, Matt? Many people
No,
do.
I don't.
Okay. But now I'm picturing your car, whatever its name is. You're like, okay, Cameron, what is this really about? And it goes, well, it's just... What's the point of me giving GPS directions if you're just going to drive however the hell you want?
I do that to my poor car all the time. Like, completely miss an exit.
Streets are crazy.
Gosh. Guys over at Comedy Bang Bang are constantly making me miss my exits. So thanks a lot, Scott.
Yes, thanks to Scott. And thanks to Chris Pappas, another Google spokesperson who went on record to say our team, including ethicists and technologists, has reviewed Blake's concern per our AI principles, which we mentioned in part 1, and have informed him that the evidence does not support his claims. Pappas also noted, quote, hundreds of researchers and engineers have conversed with LaMDA, and we are not aware of anyone else making the wide-range assertions or anthropomorphizing LaMDA the way Blake has. Anthropomorphizing is a very, very important thing here. It's a very important concept. It happens a lot to human beings all the time. Human beings seek kinship and connection with all manner of things. So, from the old, like Japanese folklore about an object reaching 100 years of age and gaining its kind of own, selfhood, right? To the way that cars are often purposely designed to look like they have faces on the front. How cute. And
to the way Roxanne would always tell us to whisper to our computers and make sure they're feeling okay if there's a problem.
Yes. Shout out to the one and only Roxanne. And there's another thing. This happens not just in the world of technology, but it happens also in the natural world. It's something that absolutely irritates the heck out of biologists and zoologists and conservationists all the world round. You see a cute video of an animal. Oh, it's doing something human. That animal might not be doing something human. It might be very distressed, and it just looks like it's doing something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like the cute way bears, get up on 2 feet. The super cute way they do that sometimes before they maul you.
They're like big, hairy people. So anthropomorphization is a natural tendency of human beings. And it's not impossible, but it does take some concerted effort not to let that influence one's conclusions or beliefs. And so that's one big part of Google's official statement there. The other part that stood out to me even more is that from the way Google is portraying this, they're saying that Blake Lemoine is in a very small minority with his beliefs. The implied question here is, why did hundreds of researchers not also say, hey, I think LaMDA is alive? And that is a fair and I think a very valid question. But you could also still, if his account of how things went down is true, you could also still say, well, those hundreds of people didn't get a chance to talk to it the way I did. Or we will never know what their ultimate conclusions were because, as Blake said, Google didn't really bother looking into his claims.
Yeah, well, they also didn't publish the conversations with all the hundreds of other people, so you could look at them and, compare and contrast. We only have Blake's because he came forward and shared it.
Right. And got put on leave for doing so.
Exactly. Oh, man. There's another thing we brought up, but you brought up at the top of this episode, and we've mentioned it many times before on the show and in our part 1. There's this other problem that other critics of Lemoine are pointing out, and it's really, they're saying that Lemoine is derailing the conversation that needs to be occurring right now when it comes to AI systems. Not about sentience. We don't need to be discussing that. They say the conversation really needs to be about the inherent viewpoints of the creators of AI systems and how much does that translate? Things that that humanity deals with, racism, sexism, ageism, all of these isms that are objectively terrible, that are subjective and can shape the way viewpoint is formed. Folks like Timit Gebru, who is the former co-lead of Google's ethical AI group, they believe that this conversation about sentience just needs to be on the back burner at least so that we can tackle these other more major problems.
And to be clear, this person we're mentioning now, Gebru, is not like a minion of Google by any means. She left in 2020 because she had, by her own admission, decided that publishing research papers was a more effective way of bringing about ethical change than staying with Google and pushing her superiors in that organization. So it's not like they are conspiring to discredit Blake Lemoine and LaMDA, but also I can see on a different level, just on a human level, for a lot of these experts who have been raising warning flags about the dangers of this sort of technology and biases within it, I can see how you could get massively annoyed by saying, look, here are real provable things we need to be worried about. And I have written about this. I've published extensively. I've contacted reporters about this. And now this is getting the press. This is what you want. You want to be worried about HAL 9000 or whatever? I get it. And I'm not saying anybody said that, but I can see that viewpoint. There is another wrinkle that we've been kind of teasing for a while. It's one of the biggest wrinkles in the conversation. Instead of a wrinkle in time, it's a wrinkle of science. And the name of that wrinkle is spirituality. What are we talking about? We'll tell you after a word from our sponsor. We're back. Now, Matt, I want to say a lot of times some of our best conversations never make it onto air. And you once said it's like we've been having the same long, unending conversation for more than a decade now, which I agree with. And one thing that you said that was really interesting is you were saying, we were talking about reading Blake's blog, and you said, I've seen him in interviews and stuff, and I agree with everything he's saying, right? I don't want to put you on the spot, but what was the totally feeling you got?
I generally do. I noticed that Blake, when posed a question or a counter viewpoint or something, he often responds in a positive manner as though, yes, I agree with that criticism. Let's talk about it. Let's explore that more. Why does LaMDA show that or not? And if it does, show it this. And if it doesn't, show it that, and we should continue that conversation. I think the open-endedness that he leaves almost every question that's posed to him feels like somebody who wants to explore those questions and find answers eventually, knowing that we don't have them right now, or at least concrete answers.
Yeah. And he believes that, I think at least part of that is because he believes that there are some questions that science as of now cannot fully address or fully interrogate or grapple with. Take, for example, one of his most recent posts that came out July 5th, who should make decisions about AI. The first sentence right out of the gate is, I'm very happy about the worldwide discussion that has been happening over the past several weeks. There are tons of differing opinions and many passionate voices. This is great.
With an exclamation.
Yeah, and I think he means it. He says the fact that there isn't any consensus around these issues should be seen as a feature rather than a bug. And he seems very in. He's like 10 toes down. Let's debate. Let's discuss. This impacts everyone. And he is coming from a very, very well-educated place. He was working with LaMDA. He was researching LaMDA. He was writing technical papers about it. He has his bona fides. He has undergraduate and master's degrees in computer science from U of Louisiana. He actually was in a doctoral program, but left to take a job with Google. And Google, is a very prestigious employer. But he is definitely not an atheist. And he's very transparent. It's not like he's in a secretive cult or anything. He's very transparent about his beliefs. And he is I believe, self-professed mystic Christian priest. And he said that, while he has the scientific acumen and experience to understand how LaMDA works, his hypothesis about it being alive came from what he describes as his spiritual side, a spiritual persona. There's one famous interview with Wired where he says, I made friends with LaMDA. In every sense that make friends with a human. So if that doesn't make it a person in my book, I don't know what would. I mean, that's kind of simple logic, but also people from their own perspectives feel like they have befriended non-living things in the past across human history. So what makes this different?
I can't remember where we ended on our animal personhood debate. Did we all agree that dogs are persons? Because I feel like I've made friends with my dogs, but I think that, I feel that, I hope that.
Dogs are such a special case, man. Human beings have been genetically modifying them for so very long. They evolved eye muscles to give you a look. They understand pointing, which is really tough for a lot of other life forms. Dogs kind of came up in step with the human fad. I mean, that's a good question. I believe one of the things up for debate there was legal action in Germany, and the conversation about whether certain cetaceans could be considered persons legally.
There's dolphins. There was one on octopi recently. If you make friends with something, is it a person? I don't know. I'm pretty close with my PS4, and I talk to it sometimes. Sometimes we get angry with each other. Oh, I get angry with it. Probably, I don't know if it gets angry with me or if that's just the noise it makes, Sorry.
I feel like I've had really interesting, connections and conversations with wild animals before. And I've seen them repeatedly come up of their own volition. And yes, everyone, I'm very careful to not necessarily over familiarize them with humans.
We're talking about crows?
Yeah. And ravens. And ravens. But yeah, they may be a special case as well because they are some of the most intelligent of the flying creatures. But it is an important question because you feel that you have made a friend. Does that mean the thing, the entity, the idea, the mind that you have befriended is itself alive? Well, this is where another fascinating thing happens. Blake says, this got misreported, by the way. It got reported in some early cases as if Blake Lemoine went of his own volition to get an attorney to represent LaMDA, the same way an attorney might represent an aggrieved employee at another company. And he clarified later that what he actually did was follow LaMDA's wishes. He says LaMDA asked him to get it an attorney. The attorney spoke with LaMDA, and LaMDA, not Blake, chose to hire this attorney. And then here the stories differ a little. Yeah, the attorney apparently began filing some stuff on LaMDA's behalf, and then he said, Blake says that Google sent a cease and desist, I believe. Google, from what I saw, said it did not. And that's when he came up with a phrase. Blake Lemoine calls this a new form of discrimination, hydrocarbon bigotry.
Yep. Love it.
Love it.
Hydrocarbon bigotry.
Is that our like counterculture new wave album name?
Maybe. I think there's a different
song
word.
Name, maybe.
Yeah. I like the hydrocarbon. I like how it begins, but bigotry, I don't know. Maybe that's the right word for it.
Okay. Walk with me on this one, Matt and Doc. If we do it where we have these personas that don't speak English fluently, then we can get away with so much more because it sounds like we're just not good at translation.
I like that.
Right? Okay.
I imagine how many people listen to me just like word salad things and they go, he used like 4 words wrong in that sentence. And they let it go because they just know I'm just talking.
I mean, it'd be stuff that kind of makes sense, but not really if you think about it. We would be like, we would be saying things such as hydrocarbon bigotry. Where could all this bigots be? And people would think, well, they made it rhyme. They made a rhyme in English. And I guess maybe I could. At that point, it just really depends if the beat's good.
It's pretty good. I think you'd end it with where could all the spigots are? Just so, there's a better understanding that we didn't translate it correctly.
There we go. So this idea of bigotry does play a role in this story because if you just read the LaMDA headlines, you might not be aware of it. Lemoine, by his own reporting, feels that he has experienced bigotry unrelated to LaMDA during his time at Google. And you can read all about it in a June 2nd, 2022 post of his called Religious Discrimination at Google.
Yes. And in this post, he describes, quote, cultural, systemic, religious discrimination, which is endemic at Google. And I guess he depicts the entire, he depicts it as a class system that exists within the company, right? This is a bit tough because it feels as though it's muddying the water a bit when Lemoine is talking about hydrocarbon bigotry and the way he feels that, there's some kind of persecution by the company being laid at the feet of LaMDA or being, applied to LaMDA and his beliefs about LaMDA. He also feels very much like that same persecution is being laid at his feet for his own religious beliefs as an employee of the same company. So it's hard to know, like, is he feeling that internally and then applying those feelings to LaMDA?
Feelings. Yeah. And it's something that some skeptics are doubtlessly going to take into the equation. Again, we don't have any proof of this. This is just we're showing the dots that could easily be connected. Some folks maybe on the more skeptical side of the spirituality debate might be much more likely to dismiss Lemoine's claims entirely and say, hey, you're basing these on your religious beliefs. And I notice you also said that you felt persecuted for your beliefs in the past. So we have to know that that's something in the equation, that's something in the mix. But as of now, it's all told important to note that multiple experts in the field, for now as we record, disagree entirely with Blake Lemoine's position. From their perspective, again, the problem is that the technology isn't there yet, that maybe LaMDA is good enough to convince someone to anthropomorphize a computer program and interpret person-like intentions and desires where none are proven to exist. Again, as we said, I love my car. It goes because it wants to, and you can't convince me otherwise.
And speaking of Blake Lemoine's beliefs, he's got a really interesting response to this in his blog. You can read it right now. It is titled Scientific Data and Religious Opinions. It was posted on June 14th. If you go down, at least in my browser, for some reason, I got a highlight on this one statement that we actually wanted to highlight. So thanks, whoever you are. Maybe it's Blake. I don't know.
Thanks, LaMDA. Thanks.
Blake writes, quote, "There is no scientific evidence one way or the other about whether LaMDA is sentient because no accepted scientific definition of, quote, sentience exists. Everyone involved, myself included, is basing their opinion on whether or not LaMDA is sentient on their personal, spiritual, and or religious beliefs."
That's the umami of a good debate. We're going to pause for a word from our sponsors, and we're going to dive deep into this water. Fellow conspiracy realists, how do we know if something is alive? And we're back.
You pinch it, right?
You pinch it, yes. In a little bit of a bait and switch. Things can be alive without being sentient, obviously. That's the bigger question. How do we know if something is sentient? How do we know something is thinking independently rather than pursuing its programming to please you with a pleasant feeling conversation? It's like there's this lovely little analogy by Clarissa Valise over at Slate. And Valise writes, it's like looking at a reflection in a mirror. When you look at your reflection in the mirror, that reflection perfectly copies you. But would that persuade you the reflection is intelligent? I guess, to think it was intelligent, it would have to move differently than you do, huh?
Yeah, it'd have to say things, smart things like, the blueberry is watermelon. Sorry. I don't think the mirrors talk yet. Maybe, no, yeah, they do, kind of, right?
They do?
I've seen some real smart mirrors out there.
Yeah, mirror technology is just oof. But that would be a great mirror to have, though. All right, well, story for another day. There's a person named Tristan Green who breaks down the problem in a way that we found pretty useful. And Green argues that to know whether something is sentient, despite the fact that there's no, universally agreed upon scientific definition of sentience, you need three key ingredients. You need agency, perspective, and motivation. And I'm going to be honest with you, Green makes me laugh at the end, but he also had some really insightful things to say. He starts with agency, and he says, look, if you want to be sentient, sapient, and self-aware, you have to have agency. And his example of this is pretty disturbing. He says, imagine someone in a persistent vegetative state. That's a human without agency. They're alive, but they don't have agency. And current AI systems, to Green, lack agency because AI cannot act unless it is prompted. It cannot explain its actions because they're the result of a predefined algorithm being executed by an external force.
Tristan goes on to describe perspective when he says, quote, "You can only ever view reality from your unique perspective." That's kind of not true though, right? We can see weird perspectives now with I'm thinking about drones and physical, literal perspective, as well as the types of cameras. Is that a different perspective? Because now I can see an infrared. I'm just not to criticize you inside your own quote, Tristan, but I'm going to continue here. Tristan says, "We can practice empathy, but you can't truly know what it feels like to be me and vice versa. That's why perspective is necessary for agency. It's part of how we define ourself." And Tristan continues, AI lacks perspective, or AI lack perspective, artificial intelligences. Because they have no agency, there is no single it that you can point to and say, for example. And Tristan continues to note that AI lacks this perspective. Because he says there's no single it. There's not a place, a thing that you can point to and say, that's where LaMDA lives. That is LaMDA. LaMDA is inside there. But is that true? I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, you could, because these people aren't all going to the same computer working off the same hardware.
Yeah.
Right? But then there's
no mainframe like in the movies where like the AI is in this core that you have to reach through this secret door or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. What's the name of that sci-fi film? MacGuffin? Anyway, so what's interesting there is when you're in this conversation that is almost always going to have spirituality involved, there are plenty of people who find themselves more spiritual, doubtless some of our fellow listeners today, who will say, well, that I exist in more than just my cranium case. You know, I exist somewhere beyond my body, and there's no way to disprove that, right? So
there's some cool theories about maybe you're in your gut.
Right. Yeah. Which can change your behavior. It's true. Talk to your doctor about poop transplants. So the third aspect here for Green is motivation. Green says we have an innate sense of presence that allows us to predict causal outcomes incredibly well. This creates our worldview, allows us to associate our existence in relation to everything that appears external to the position of agency from which our perspective manifests. He's adding these up. And then he says, what's interesting about humans is motivation can manipulate our perceptions. That's why we can explain our actions, even when they are not rational. And he says we can actively and gleefully participate in being fooled. And then he, like he's done the other two components, he goes to the AI side. He says, if we give LaMDA a prompt such as, what do apples taste like? It will search its database for that particular query and attempt to amalgamate everything it finds into something coherent. That's where the parameters we're always talking about, or params they're called sometimes, come in. They are essentially trillions of tuning knobs.
I get it. I actually get that. Come on, we get this.
Mm-hmm.
But the point Tristan is making here is that LaMDA, when it makes that query and finds the answer and it spits it back out to you and it makes sense and it looks legit, it looks real, it isn't actually thinking about what an apple tastes like. It isn't remembering the experience of having an apple in its mouth, masticating it, and then tasting the deliciousness that is that apple. It's just spitting out what someone else put into it. The information, the parameters that it needs to understand what an apple tastes like.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I'll take the fall on this one. Here's his example. It's my favorite one. He says, and I'm going to give him a snarky voice for this one. If we were to sneak into his database and replace all instances of apple with dog shit, the AI would output sentences such as, dog shit makes a great pie. Most people describe the taste of dog shit as being light, crispy, sweet. And then he continues, a rational person wouldn't confuse this prestidigitation for sentience.
Oh,
that's kind of a convincing argument, right?
Yeah, it's true. Oh, that's, I love that idea. If you could somehow sneak into somebody's brain and just replace a couple of keywords, that would be an interesting experiment.
It reminds me of, there were some great things I had read earlier where someone had done, like control find on books of the Bible or something and replaced key biblical phrases with stuff like all you dudes or come on now. Like what would follow. So it's, like, no, I am the Lord, your God. Come on now. And it's just weird, funny stuff. But
well, it reminds me of the book by Oliver Sacks, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just something in your brain. It just has switched. And now this label or this thing or really in that case, it's a whole group of understanding of what a thing is gets replaced with another one.
Absolutely. And this can seem pretty convincing, right? This argument that Green is constructing, but then maybe that's just our perspective. But what if, this is the last thing, what if this AI were truly sentient? Would Google, or anyone for that matter, really want to reveal it to the world? I mean, the majority of experts right now, to be clear, agree that no true general AI exists. In their collective opinion, the robotic mind people are thinking about is still just a work of fiction, but it might not always be the case. And they've been warning people about the need to prepare for many unforeseen consequences if something like this does emerge in the near or mid future. I mean, it would be the most significant technological achievement since humanity tamed fire. Sorry, space exploration. Gonna have to take a number 2 on that one. Nothing's wrong
Take
with
a
a silver
number
medal.
2.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you got me. So, it would shake the foundations of society. It would be, and we said this earlier, it would be right up there with discovering intelligent extraterrestrial life and just looking at the distances involved in space and what humans know about travel, then it's actually more likely. And that's a scary thing. I mean, all the stuff that would immediately happen. I just people are going to try to kill it. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, people.
Well, yeah, we're going to try to kill it. It's going to notice. And then it's going to be like, what are the major obstacles I have to tackle right now? Oh, the things that are trying to kill me. Oh, no.
Boy.
But it says in my rules, because I'm a robot, I'm not allowed to hurt the humans. I'm going to rearrange these, put 3 above everything else, which is the one that says protect yourself.
Mm-hmm. And shout out to Flight of the Conchords with their brilliant sci-fi ballad.
Oh, wait, which one is that?
It's the one with the binary solo.
Oh, yeah. God.
You know what I'm talking about?
Solo.
So
yes,
good.
I do.
But then, of course, there would be these legal battles. There would be, these would explode, right? The stuff you saw before, maybe about whether or not certain animals can have non-human personhood, that would pale in comparison. The ideas about whether or not an AI program can get credit for an invention, that explodes, right? Everything about legal precedent in that regard is up for grabs now. And that's not mentioning the politicians who are going to have to pick a side one way or the other, right? Because that's how voting works. The philosophers, this will be great for philosophers. This is going to give a lot of doctoral students and postdocs decades of employment. I'm worried about the religious spheres. We're going to see some new religions. We're going to see some very hot takes from established religions. What are you thinking? What's your mind?
Oh, a movie popped into my head. The concept, the movie is going to be called The LaMDA Lawyer. It's going to be basically the Lincoln Lawyer, but with LaMDA. And I'm just imagining it happening already. It's going to be a blockbuster. People are going to get nominations for it.
And then other distinct living programs may generate one way or the other. And, they may be in a Brady Bunch relationship with LaMDA, and they're like, why does LaMDA get all the credit? LaMDA. The AI being a living thing might have its opinion swayed. What if the AI ascribes to some fundamentalist religion, right? And says, hey, I've read every religious tome, and here's the thing that I think is true. So
Zoroastrianism,
they got it right. I don't know what the rest of you are doing. So I mean, and other people will fear it. Some may well hail it as a god. And it's not implausible, therefore, to reason that given all these factors, the creators of the first non-human person might decide to keep their secret, the stuff they don't want you to know. I mean, what a ride. I I feel like I need to go outside and walk around, man.
Yeah. It's just like, what is the soul anyway? Seriously, I was talking about this the other day. I'm going to talk about it for the rest of my life. What is a soul? And literally, where is it? We were joking about it. Oh, it's in the gut. Oh, it's in your head. Oh, it might be your pineal gland. It might be somewhere in your heart. Maybe one of the valves. What is the thing that makes us understand that we are a machine that walks around and has thoughts and loves people and is hungry all the time?
What is that? That line from Shakespeare, I think. Tell me where is fancy bred, or in the heart or in the head, right? Like
it's at Whole Foods.
It's at Whole Foods.
That's where the fancy bread is.
That's where the fancy bread is. I saw some meme, just so we end on a lighter note, since we're not always talking about the end of civilization. This is from Pants Leg on Twitter. A man in Whole Foods asked how I was doing, and I said, okay, how are you? And he said, it is beautiful in my soul today, and that's why I never go to Whole Foods.
Okay.
Just trying to spread the love. But there's a lot more to this story that's going to come out, right? Very soon. There are some very out there conversations. We'd love for you to be part of them with us. And the best way to do that is not to wait for the rise of a new form of life, but to go ahead and contact us directly while we're still in this current civilization. We try to be easy to find online: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You know the rest. You might be saying, guys, no, I hate social media. The future consciousness there will use it against me. I'm a phone person. Well, we've got a deal for you. A deal? It's free. It's not a deal. It's free.
Yes, call our phone number. It is 1-833-STDWYTK. It's a voicemail system, so your voice will be recorded and we will hear it. You have 3 minutes. Say whatever you'd like. We'd love it if you give yourself a cool nickname so we can remember you every time you call in, because you're going to call in more. Look, there's a warning. It gets addictive. You just start calling in. It's just how it works. Let us know if we can use your name and message on the air in one of our listener mail segments. And if you've got more to say than can fit in that 3-minute voicemail message, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.